as coronavirus cases continue to rise in the U.S. The question on everyone's mind is, did Trump botch the coronavirus response? Welcome back to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. April. Spring is around the corner, and that horrible coronavirus pandemic is a thing of the past.
The virus. They're working hard. Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. I hope that's true.
Okay, that didn't happen. As of recording, more than 25,000 people have died from the coronavirus in the United States. Now that is a tragedy. Was it a preventable tragedy? Did Trump and his administration fail to protect Americans from this deadly pandemic? That is the accusation being made.
More people are sick in America tonight because Donald Trump is president. More people are dead and dying in America tonight because Donald Trump is president.
But as the president fiddles, people are dying.
It is clear to me, at least, that we have an administration that is largely incompetent and whose incompetence and recklessness have threatened the lives of many, many people in our country.
All right, obviously that's the response from the left. On the other side, you have ridiculous levels of praise for Trump's response from far-right officials like, wait. Ilhan Omar said Trump's response has been incredible. Omar, does Trump have something on you? Blink twice if you need help. But California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom also praised Trump's efforts. So did New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo, which just goes to show maybe the political left and right have finally stopped fighting each other. But that would be boring for the media. Thankfully, Trump and Cuomo started fighting again. Trump attacks Cuomo. Cuomo slams Trump. Cuomo versus Trump. Two guys from Queens fight it out. It's the coronavirus clash! Now that's exciting. Which is why it was such a bummer earlier this week when Governor Cuomo said this.
This is no time for politics, and it is no time to fight. I put my hand out in total partnership and cooperation with the president. If he wants a fight, he's not going to get it from me. Period.
No. Why would he do that? Won't somebody please think of the ratings? Wait. It's okay. Even if Cuomo doesn't want to fight, surely Trump will fight. Let's ask him.
You spoke about Governor Cuomo. Just wondering if you have any thoughts on some of his remarks from earlier today, where he basically said that were New York to be pressured to be open, it would cause a constitutional crisis. And he basically said that you declared yourself King Trump. So I'm wondering if you heard those thoughts.
I've declared myself as king. I heard he said that, but I didn't see the remarks. But he understands how we helped him. We'll get along just fine. He understands. We'll get along just fine, please.
Oh, geez, getting along is so boring. But as we just saw, the media needs conflict, and it feeds conflict, which is one reason we're seeing a lot of confusing, mixed messages about the Trump administration's response to the coronavirus. Is there a way to objectively look at how the United States has done? Well, there are some numbers we can look at, and I'll get to those in a moment. But first, I think it's important to look at the context of everything that's happened just quickly. The first known case of the coronavirus was sometime in November in Wuhan, China. For many weeks, the Chinese Communist Party did its best to cover it up. Even in mid-January, as the disease was already rapidly spreading around the world, Chinese officials were saying there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission. And the World Health Organization, the WHO, pushed the Communist Party's false narrative. It took the WHO till the end of January to even declare a public health emergency, and mid-March to call it a pandemic. This obviously infuriated public health officials around the world who had based their recommendations on the WHO. That put pretty much every country behind the curve, regardless of who's in charge of those countries. But thanks to a massive cover-up by the Chinese regime and, at best, incompetence by the WHO, the US government already had the cards stacked against it as the coronavirus began to spread in America. That would have been challenging for any administration, let alone one that began the year in the midst of an impeachment trial. Yeah, remember that happened? Could we maybe just reboot 2020? I think it's got a virus. Anyway, so here are the numbers I was talking about. A report last year by the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health called the Global Health Security Index said the United States is ranked #1 out of all countries in the world as far as being able to handle a pandemic. The reality, though, didn't pan out like that. Johns Hopkins has been running this website tracking the coronavirus spread. And from it we can get some idea of how the US has done compared to other countries. As of April 15th, the US had more than 1,800 cases per million people. That's only the 9th highest rate in the world, among countries with more than 100,000 people. Luxembourg, Iceland, and Spain are numbers 1, 2, and 3. As far as deaths per million, the US ranked number 11. Whatever happened to America first? But that data is just a snapshot. The situation is changing rapidly, and those numbers could look entirely different in a month or two. Those numbers also don't take into consideration the fact these countries weren't all hit with the coronavirus at the same time, and that data from some countries could be incomplete. Also, it's clear that numbers from China are complete lies. But those numbers do show one thing. Compared to other countries, Trump has not completely failed, nor has he wildly succeeded. And that means we've got a lot to talk about, starting with, did the Trump administration act quickly enough? A common criticism about Trump's response is that for months he ignored early warnings about the coronavirus. And if you listen to how Trump changed his messaging on the coronavirus, you might think that makes sense.
How concerned are you?
Well, we pretty much shut it down coming in from China. We're in great shape, though. We have 12 cases, 11 cases. And I think the numbers are going to get progressively better as we go along. We have the greatest doctors in the world. We have it very much under control.
But by the end of March, things sounded pretty different.
Tonight, health officials say even if people do their part, between 100,000 and 240,000 Americans could die from the coronavirus.
This is going to be a very painful, very, very painful 2 weeks.
So, did Trump ignore early warnings about the coronavirus? Well, it's complicated. On January 31st, the day after the World Health Organization finally declared the coronavirus a public health emergency, Trump created a coronavirus task force and issued a travel ban, blocking anyone who had been to affected areas in China from coming to the United States, with the exception of US citizens and permanent residents. That was actually a very important early step in slowing the spread of the coronavirus. Now remember, at the time, China and the World Health Organization were saying travel bans were unnecessary, and Trump's travel ban was heavily criticized at the time as being racist. Besides the travel ban, though, the US was already taking action at the beginning of January. On December 31st, China reported the coronavirus to the WHO, although they hadn't yet admitted it could be transmitted between humans. But by January 6th, the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention issued a travel notice. On January 17th, 3 major US airports began screening passengers coming from Wuhan, China. On January 20th, Dr. Anthony Fauci announced that the National Institutes of Health was working on a vaccine. And by January 21st, the CDC successfully developed a testing kit and diagnosed the first US patient. It also activated its Emergency Operations Center. That's just to name a few of the steps taken. So obviously the claims that Trump or his administration did nothing early on are not accurate. But a lot of the criticism now focuses on the fact that Dr. Anthony Fauci, a member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, said he and other experts recommended on February 21st the U.S. would need to go on lockdown to prevent the spread. The recommendations included things we now all know and love so well: social distancing and businesses and schools closing down. But it wasn't until mid-March that the Trump administration followed that advice and released these guidelines. Would lives have been saved if Trump had followed Fauci's advice earlier? That's what he was asked recently on CNN.
Do you think lives could have been saved if social distancing, physical distancing, stay-at-home measures had started third week of February instead of mid-March?
You know, Jake, again, it's the what would have, what could have. It's very difficult to go back and say that. I mean, obviously, you could logically say that if you had a process that was ongoing and you started mitigation earlier, you could have saved lives. Obviously, no one is going to deny that. But what goes into those kinds of decisions is complicated. But you're right. I mean, obviously, if we had, right from the very beginning, shut everything down, it may have been a little bit different. But there was a lot of pushback about shutting things down back then.
So essentially, hindsight is 20/20. Not much of a comfort to all those who have lost loved ones. Did Trump leave the U.S. unprepared? Presidential candidate Joe Biden joined the chorus of critics slamming Trump for slashing the budget of the CDC and other health organizations.
We increased the budget of the CDC. We increased the NIH budget. We should have our president today, and he's wiped all that out.
The problem is that isn't true. What is true is that every year Trump proposed reducing the CDC's funding, but the president doesn't make the budget. Congress does. And every year since Trump's election, Congress passed and Trump signed spending bills with year-over-year increases for the CDC. Similar things have happened with other health agencies. You might have also heard that Trump fired the pandemic response team. Well, that's partly false. But hey, that also means it's partly true. What happened was this. The pandemic response team was part of the National Security Council, which had become incredibly bloated. Under the previous 3 presidents, the National Security Council's staff had quadrupled in size. That's why in 2015, Obama began cutting staff. Trump continued cutting staff. He's a big Obama fan. According to Tim Morrison, who joined the National Security Council under Trump, a bunch of overlapping groups were consolidated into a single, more efficient group. It is this reorganization that critics have misconstrued or intentionally misrepresented. If anything, the combined directorate was stronger because related expertise could be commingled. He also says the biodefense staff was not cut. The U.S. is also facing a critical shortage of medical supplies, but only some of that has to do with the U.S. government. It's mostly that companies barely make medical supplies in the U.S. anymore. And now that Americans suddenly need 3 billion face masks, it's hard to make or get them. Check out our episode on why the U.S. is running out of coronavirus masks for more. Also, the U.S. sent masks and ventilators to China in the early days of the coronavirus. That was obviously before we knew how bad the coronavirus would hit the U.S., and before we knew China would just hoard masks. Did Trump abandon the states? According to a member of the New York Times editorial board, Trump told governors they are on their own. But the full quote, which can be seen in the New York Times article she linked to, Trump said respirators, ventilators, all of the equipment, try getting it yourselves. We will be backing you, but try getting it yourselves. Point of sales, much better, much more direct if you can get it yourself. It's a lot different where you include the part where Trump says he would back the states. And New York has become one of the hardest hit states. Governor Cuomo was warned back in 2015 by the New York Health Department that in a severe pandemic, New York would be short about 16,000 ventilators. Ventilators are those things that keep you breathing when an illness like the coronavirus makes you not breathe. Governor Cuomo obviously did not buy those 16,000 ventilators. You can't entirely blame him, though. It would have cost taxpayers more than $500 million. It's basically the same problem with other medical equipment, like face masks. There are stockpiles, but they aren't enough. And when the coronavirus pandemic suddenly hit, everyone needed a lot more of everything, and production couldn't keep up with demand. And unfortunately, this puts hospitals, state and local governments, and the federal government all in competition for resources. Look, I'm not saying that Trump hasn't fought with governors. He obviously has. And some states complain they're not getting enough federal help. But some of the reporting on the fight between Trump and governors is exaggerated. The media has used it to stir up more conflict. Take this article from USA Today. Governors hand experts the mic during coronavirus briefings, presenting a contrast to Trump. Look at those responsible governors who listen to the experts, unlike the president who hogs the spotlight and never lets experts talk.
Thank you very much, Deb.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
So I'll have the professional answer it. Deborah, perhaps you could come up.
So in
You want to
terms,
say something, Senator? I'd love you to come up and answer the second part of her question, because I think you would do it a much better job than I would. Please.
Those poor experts never got a word in edgewise. Speaking of experts, did Trump muzzle Dr. Fauci and ignore science? A common claim is that Trump has been trying to silence health officials from saying anything he doesn't like. According to the Washington Post, Dr. Anthony Fauci is being muzzled. Trump was even asked that at a coronavirus press conference. Here's how Fauci responded.
I have never been muzzled, ever, and I've been doing this since the administration of Ronald Reagan. I'm not being muzzled by this administration. That was a real misrepresentation of what happened.
Exactly what a man being muzzled would say. Blink twice if you need help. Now, if you remember, earlier in this episode I played a clip of Fauci saying lives could have been saved if mitigation had been done earlier. Dr. Fauci is one of the country's leading experts on pandemics and the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. But even health experts can have a hard time dealing with the insanity of modern media.
I had an interview yesterday that I was asked a hypothetical question. And hypothetical questions sometimes can get you into some difficulty because it's what would have or could have. The nature of the hypothetical question was if, in fact, we had mitigated earlier, could lives have been saved? And the answer to my question was, as I always do, and I'm doing right now, perfectly honestly, say, yes. I mean, obviously, if mitigation helps, I've been up here many times telling you that mitigation works. So if mitigation works, and you instigate it and you initiate it earlier, you will probably have saved more lives. If you initiated it later, you probably would have lost more lives.
Your attempts at logic won't fool me. I know a man who's been muzzled when I see one. He went on to describe what actually happened in his conversation with the president.
The first and only time that Dr. Birx and I went in and formally made a recommendation to the president to actually have a, quote, shutdown in the sense of not really shutdown, but to really have strong mitigation. We discussed it. Obviously, there would be concern by some that, in fact, that might have some negative consequences. Nonetheless, the president listened to the recommendation and went to the mitigation. The next second time that I went with Dr. Birx into the president and said, 15 days are not enough. We need to go 30 days. Obviously, there were people who had a problem with that because of the potential secondary effects. Nonetheless, at that time, the president went with the health recommendations, and we extended it another 30 days.
You know, I'm sorry. I can't stand to see a man being muzzled like that. We just had to cut him off. That's... whew. What about the claims that Trump has imperiled us because of his rejection of science?
And I never, where I said, for scientific reasons, we really should do this, that he hasn't said, let's do it. He has never overruled me.
Oh, that poor man being muzzled. There has been criticism of Trump rejecting the World Health Organization's mortality rate. On a Fox News interview, where else, he questioned the mortality rate the WHO gave of 3.4%.
Well, I think the 3.4% is really a false number. Now,
adding the very scientific,
this is just my hunch.
Well, scientifically speaking, no one knows the true mortality rate of the coronavirus. That's especially true in the US, where a lot of people who have had no symptoms or only mild symptoms have not been tested because there aren't enough test kits. We just don't have enough data to know the mortality rate. Speaking of mortality, at the beginning of March, Trump compared the coronavirus to the flu. That's wrong for so many reasons. To his credit, he did quickly change his stance on this. 4 days later, he declared the coronavirus a national emergency. Does that mean he listened to science? Or did he just stop listening to NBC and CBS and the Washington Post? Which is to say, anyone can be wrong. Except me, obviously. So did Trump blow the coronavirus response? Well, the United States is not in a catastrophically bad position, but it's not in the best position either. Trump was wrong about some things, but he also seems to have changed his mind after listening to experts. The U.S. was somewhat unprepared for the coronavirus, but a lot of that would have happened no matter who the president was. And other controversies, like the one about Dr. Fauci being muzzled or Trump abandoning the states, seem to be largely conflicts exaggerated by the media. It's just complicated, like everything else we cover on this show. I think I need to self-isolate for a bit. But before I do, YouTube often demonetizes our episodes about controversial topics like the coronavirus. That's why, to keep making America Uncovered, we rely on viewer support through the crowdfunding website Patreon. Visit patreon.com/AmericaUncovered to learn how you can help. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.